In the heart of the American frontier, in a humble one-room log cabin, a story began that would reshape a nation. This is the story of Abraham Lincoln, a man born into poverty who would rise to become one of the most consequential figures in world history. His early life was one of hardship and labor. The untamed wilderness of Kentucky and Indiana was his classroom, and his hands were calloused from an early age. Books were a rare luxury, but for young Abe, they were windows to a world beyond the backwoods. He devoured every word he could find, teaching himself law, literature, and the art of debate by the flickering light of a fireplace. This self-taught knowledge, combined with a powerful sense of justice, would become the bedrock of his future. As a young man, Lincoln moved to New Salem, Illinois, a bustling frontier town. Here, his towering height and folksy charm made him a local favorite. He worked as a shopkeeper, postmaster, and surveyor, but his true passion was for the law and politics. He was known for his sharp wit and compelling storytelling, abilities that served him well as he entered the Illinois state legislature. It was during this time that he began to truly grapple with the moral and political questions that were tearing the nation apart. The issue was slavery. As the United States expanded westward, the debate over whether new territories should be free or slave states reached a boiling point. Lincoln, while not an outright abolitionist in his early career, firmly believed that slavery was a moral wrong and was vehemently opposed to its expansion. He argued that the nation's founders intended for slavery to eventually wither and die, not to spread and entrench itself further. His powerful arguments brought him national attention. In 1858, his series of debates against Stephen Douglas for a U.S. Senate seat became a landmark event in American political history. Though he lost the election, his eloquent and principled stance against the expansion of slavery established him as a leading voice in the newly formed Republican Party. He famously declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." Just 2 years later, this prairie lawyer, this self-made man from the frontier, achieved the unthinkable. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. His victory, however, was the spark that ignited the nation's darkest chapter. Before he even took office, 7 southern states seceded from the Union, with more to follow. The House was not just divided. It was collapsing. The Civil War began, and Lincoln was faced with a task of unimaginable difficulty: to preserve the Union and lead a country at war with itself. The early years of the war were disastrous for the North. Defeats mounted, casualties soared, and public morale plummeted. Lincoln faced immense pressure, not just from the Confederacy, but from within his own government. Critics called him a tyrant, a fool, an unsophisticated country bumpkin unfit for the presidency. Yet, through it all, Lincoln's resolve never wavered. He was a masterful commander-in-chief, learning military strategy on the job and tirelessly searching for generals who had the will to fight and win. His leadership was defined by patience, pragmatism, and a profound empathy for the soldiers on both sides of the conflict. The turning point came in 1863, after a crucial Union victory at the Battle of Antietam. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It was a bold and transformative act. While it didn't immediately free all enslaved people, it reframed the purpose of the war. It was no longer just about preserving the Union. It was now a fight for human freedom. This single act changed the course of the war and the course of history, giving the Union a powerful moral cause. Later that year, at the dedication of a new military cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln delivered what would become the most famous speech in American history. In just 272 words, he beautifully articulated the meaning of the war and the promise of the nation. He spoke of a new birth of freedom and resolved that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. His words echoed across the fields and through the ages, redefining the very idea of America. After 4 long and brutal years, the war finally ended in the spring of 1865. The Union was preserved. Lincoln's vision for a reunited nation was within reach. In his second inaugural address, delivered just weeks before the war's end, he offered no words of triumph, but instead a message of profound humility and reconciliation. With malice toward none, with charity for all, he urged, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. He began to lay the groundwork for Reconstruction, a plan to bring the Southern states back into the Union with compassion and fairness. He dreamed of a future where the wounds of war could heal and the nation could finally live up to its founding ideals of liberty and equality for all. But it was a dream he would not live to see. On the evening of April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the Confederate surrender, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated while attending a play at Ford's Theater. The nation, on the cusp of peace, was plunged back into mourning. A leader who had guided them through their greatest trial was gone. The legacy of Abraham Lincoln is immense and complex. He was the great emancipator who freed 4 million people from bondage. He was the savior of the Union who held the nation together through its most perilous hour. But he was also just a man of deep thought, quiet melancholy, and unwavering principle. From a log cabin to the White House, his journey is a testament to the power of character, the importance of education, and the enduring belief that a divided house can, with courage and vision, be made whole again. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Abraham Lincoln. Have you ever wondered how a self-taught lawyer from the backwoods became one of the most consequential presidents in history? The story of Abraham Lincoln's rise to power is a masterclass in political strategy, timing, and sheer determination. It's a tale that begins not in triumph, but in a series of calculated, even brilliant defeats. Our story starts in 1858. The nation is a powder keg, and the issue of slavery is the fuse. The man of the hour seems to be Stephen, a Douglas, a little giant, a powerful Illinois senator with presidential ambitions. He championed popular sovereignty, the idea that settlers in new territories should vote for themselves whether to allow slavery. It sounded democratic, but it was a political minefield. Enter Abraham Lincoln. At this point, he's a well-respected lawyer but a political underdog. He decides to challenge Douglas for his Senate seat. This was a David versus Goliath matchup. Douglas was a national figure. Lincoln was barely known outside of Illinois. But Lincoln had a secret weapon, his powerful logic and moral clarity. This led to the legendary Lincoln-Douglas debates. For months, they crisscrossed Illinois, engaging in 7 epic showdowns. Douglas, a skilled debater, tried to paint Lincoln as a radical abolitionist who wanted to ignite a race war. He was charismatic, powerful, and played to the crowd's prejudices. Lincoln, however, was strategic. He knew he couldn't win by being an outright abolitionist in a state with deep-seated racial biases. Instead, he framed the issue morally. He argued that while he wasn't advocating for immediate social equality, The nation's founders intended to put slavery on a path to ultimate extinction. He famously declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He argued that the nation couldn't endure permanently half slave and half free. During the Freeport debate, Lincoln laid a brilliant trap. He asked Douglas a pointed question: could the people of a territory lawfully exclude slavery before forming a state constitution? This put Douglas in an impossible position. If he said yes, he would alienate the pro-slavery South, which believed the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision made slavery legal everywhere. If he said no, he would betray his own principle of popular sovereignty and lose support in the North. Douglas walked right into it. He answered with what became known as the Freeport Doctrine, saying that settlers could effectively keep slavery out by refusing to pass local laws to protect it. It was a clever answer that helped him win the Senate election in Illinois that year. Lincoln lost the battle, but as we'll see, he was setting himself up to win the war. Douglas's answer fatally split the Democratic Party, destroying his support in the South. Lincoln had lost the Senate seat, but he had emerged as a national figure and a leading voice of the new Republican Party. After the debates, Lincoln wasn't content to just go back to his law practice. He spent the next year and a half strengthening his position, writing letters, giving speeches, and building a network of allies. He was playing the long game. His sights were set on a much bigger prize, the presidency. The pivotal moment came in February 1860. Lincoln was invited to speak at the Cooper Union in New York City. This was his big audition for the Eastern establishment, the powerful figures who would decide the Republican nominee. Many saw him as a rough-edged Westerner, a prairie lawyer. They were expecting a folksy storyteller. They got a statesman. Instead of fiery rhetoric, Lincoln delivered a meticulously researched, legally and historically dense speech. He spent months preparing, poring over the records of the nation's founding. His goal was to prove, with undeniable evidence, that the majority of the signers of the Constitution believed the federal government had the power to control slavery in the territories. He methodically dismantled the Southern argument and showed that it was the Republicans, not the Southern Democrats, who were the true heirs to the founders' vision. He positioned his party as the conservative one, seeking to preserve the original intent of the nation. He then turned to the South, pleading for reason, but firmly stating, "Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it." The speech was a sensation. The next day, New York newspapers printed it in full. It was hailed as one of the most brilliant political arguments ever made. Lincoln had transformed his image overnight. He was no longer just a folksy debater from Illinois. He was a serious intellectual and a presidential contender. The Cooper Union speech made Lincoln a star and put him on a direct path to the White House. 3 months later, the Republican National Convention convened in Chicago. The frontrunner was William Seward, a well-known senator from New York. He seemed like the obvious choice. But Lincoln's team of brilliant campaign managers worked tirelessly behind the scenes. They packed the convention hall with Lincoln supporters, printed counterfeit tickets to keep Seward's people out, and made strategic promises to key delegations. They presented Lincoln as the perfect compromise candidate. Seward was seen as too radical by some, while other candidates were too conservative. Lincoln, the rail splitter, was portrayed as an honest man of the people, firm in his principles but moderate in his tone. He was from the crucial swing state of Illinois, and his humble origins played perfectly with the American ideal of the self-made man. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party was in chaos. Stephen Douglas's Freeport Doctrine had come back to haunt him. The party split into northern and southern factions, who nominated two separate candidates, Douglas for the North and John C. Breckinridge for the South. A fourth candidate, John Bell, ran on a platform of simply preserving the Union. With the Democrats hopelessly divided, the path was clear. On the third ballot at the Republican convention, a massive roar erupted. Abraham Lincoln had secured the nomination. His strategic campaign, which began with a calculated loss to Douglas and culminated in his masterful Cooper Union address, had paid off. In the general election of 1860, Lincoln won with a plurality of the popular vote, but a solid majority in the Electoral College. He did it without winning a single Southern state. His victory was the final straw for the South. Before he could even take the oath of office, states began to secede from the Union, setting the stage for the Civil War. From a series of political defeats to the highest office in the land, Lincoln's journey was a testament to his incredible political skill, moral courage, and unwavering belief in the principles of the nation. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories are born from the ashes of defeat. Have you ever wondered how a nation can turn on itself? How brother can fight against brother? That's exactly what happened in America in the 1860s. The American Civil War wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow-burning fire that finally erupted, and it all started with an election. In November 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. Now, Lincoln was part of the brand-new Republican Party, which had a firm stance against the expansion of slavery into new Western territories. For many in the South, where the economy was deeply entangled with slavery, Lincoln's victory was the final straw. They saw it as a direct threat to their way of life, their economy, and their entire social structure. The long-simmering tensions between the North and South over slavery, states' rights, and economic differences were about to boil over. The reaction was swift and dramatic. Before Lincoln even took the oath of office, the dominoes began to fall. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina made a bold declaration. It was seceding from the Union. They argued that the federal government had broken its compact with the states and that they were free to leave. It was a constitutional crisis of epic proportions. South Carolina wasn't alone for long. Over the next few weeks, 6 more states from the deep South, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed suit. Imagine the chaos and uncertainty of that time. The United States was literally falling apart. These states believed they had the right to self-government and that the federal government, now under a Republican president, would trample their rights, particularly their perceived right to own slaves. In February 1861, representatives from these seceded states met in Montgomery, Alabama. Their goal? To form a new nation. They drafted their own constitution, which explicitly protected slavery, and they called themselves the Confederate States of America. They elected their own president, a former U.S. Senator from Mississippi named Jefferson Davis. Suddenly, there were 2 presidents and 2 governments claiming authority over the same land. The split was no longer just a threat, it was a reality. Meanwhile, Abraham Lincoln was preparing to take office, facing a situation no president had ever imagined. On March 4, 1861, he delivered his first inaugural address. He struck a careful tone, trying to be both firm and conciliatory. He made it clear that he had no intention of interfering with slavery where it already existed. But he also stated that secession was illegal and that the Union was perpetual. He pleaded with the South, saying, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." He hoped to calm the storm, to pull the nation back from the brink. But was anyone listening? The flashpoint came at a federal fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, Fort Sumter. The Union soldiers stationed there were running low on supplies, and Lincoln was faced with a difficult choice. If he abandoned the fort, it would look like he was accepting the Confederacy's legitimacy. If he sent in troops to reinforce it, it would be seen as an act of aggression. Lincoln chose a middle path. He decided to send only food and supplies, no troops or ammunition, and he notified the governor of South Carolina of his intentions. For the Confederacy, however, any attempt to resupply the fort was unacceptable. It was a symbol of federal authority in the heart of their new nation. On the foggy morning of April 12, 1861, Confederate General P.G.D. Beauregard gave the order. The cannons surrounding Charleston Harbor opened fire on Fort Sumter. For 34 hours, the fort was bombarded. Miraculously, no one was killed in the actual bombardment, but the Union commander, Major Robert Anderson, was forced to surrender. The American flag was lowered, and the Confederate flag was raised. The attack on Fort Sumter was the spark that ignited the full-blown war. In the North, the news was met with outrage. Lincoln's call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion was answered with overwhelming enthusiasm. The time for compromise was over. But this call to arms had the opposite effect on the remaining southern states. 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, refused to fight against their fellow Southerners and seceded to join the Confederacy. The lines were drawn. The stage was set for a bloody conflict. Both sides believed the war would be short. Young men in both the North and the South rushed to enlist, full of patriotic fervor and a sense of adventure. They thought it would be a glorious affair, over in a matter of months. They had no idea of the horror that awaited them. The first major land battle of the war took place on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia. It's known as the First Battle of Bull Run. Washington, D.C. socialites and politicians, confident of a quick Union victory, actually packed picnics and rode out to watch the battle as if it were a sporting event. The Union Army, initially successful, pushed the Confederates back. It seemed like the predictions of a swift victory were coming true. But the Confederates, led by commanders like Thomas Stonewall Jackson, who earned his famous nickname there for standing firm, rallied. The inexperienced Union troops panicked. The confident advance turned into a frantic, disorganized retreat. The same spectators who had come to watch a victory now clogged the roads, scrambling to get back to the safety of Washington. The Battle of Bull Run was a brutal awakening for everyone. It showed that the war would not be quick, easy, or glorious. The Confederacy was a formidable opponent, and this was going to be a long, difficult struggle. It shattered the illusion of a short war and signaled the beginning of a 4-year conflict that would test the very soul of America, leaving hundreds of thousands dead and changing the nation forever. The road from that first battle was a long one, leading to places like Antietam, Gettysburg, and eventually Appomattox. Have you ever wondered how one nation could be torn in two, brother fighting brother? That's the story of the American Civil War, a conflict that defined a nation and reshaped its destiny forever. Let's journey back to the 1860s. The United States was a country divided. The industrial North and the agrarian South clashed over states' rights, economics, and most critically, the institution of slavery. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, his anti-slavery stance was the final straw for the South. One by one, 11 Southern states seceded, forming the Confederate States of America. War was inevitable. In the early days, the Union, or the North, seemed to have all the advantages: more people, more factories, and more railroads. But the Confederacy had a powerful weapon of its own: brilliant military leadership. At the forefront was Robert E. Lee, a masterful strategist who consistently outmaneuvered his opponents. On the Union side, President Lincoln struggled to find a general who could match Lee. He first turned to George B. McClellan, a brilliant organizer but overly cautious on the battlefield. McClellan built a formidable army, the Army of the Potomac, but hesitated to use it. This hesitation cost the Union dearly in early campaigns. The turning point began in September 1862 at the Battle of Antietam. It was the single bloodiest day in American history, with over 22,000 casualties. Though technically a draw, Lee's invasion of the North was halted, giving Lincoln the political victory he needed. Just days later, he issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This monumental decree declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory would be freed. The war was no longer just about preserving the Union. It was now a fight for freedom. It also had a huge diplomatic impact, preventing European powers like Britain and France from officially supporting the Confederacy. The summer of 1863 would prove to be the war's most decisive moment. In the East, Robert E. Lee, emboldened by a string of victories, marched his army north again into Pennsylvania. He met the Union Army at a small town called Gettysburg. For 3 brutal days, the two armies clashed in what would become the largest battle ever fought on North American soil. The climax came on the 3rd day with Pickett's charge, a disastrous frontal assault by the Confederates that was repulsed with staggering losses. Defeated, Lee was forced to retreat back to Virginia. He would never invade the North again. Simultaneously, hundreds of miles away in the West, another Union general was making a name for himself. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. Unlike McClellan, Grant was relentless and understood the brutal math of war. He had been campaigning to capture Vicksburg, a Confederate fortress on the Mississippi River. Taking Vicksburg would cut the Confederacy in two, severing its vital supply lines. After a long and grueling siege, Vicksburg surrendered to Grant on July 4, 1863, just 1 day after the victory at Gettysburg. These twin victories were a devastating blow from which the South could never fully recover. Lincoln had finally found his general. In 1864, he promoted Grant to command all Union armies. Grant's strategy was simple but brutal: apply constant, relentless pressure on all Confederate fronts. He personally led the fight against Lee in Virginia in a series of bloody battles known as the Overland Campaign. Meanwhile, he sent his trusted general, William Tecumseh Sherman, to strike at the heart of the South. Sherman's march to the sea was a campaign of total war. His army cut a path of destruction from Atlanta to Savannah, destroying infrastructure, railroads, and anything that could support the Confederate war effort. The goal was to break the South's will to fight, and it worked. By the spring of 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing. Lee's once mighty army was trapped, starving, and surrounded. On April 9, 1865, at a small courthouse in Appomattox, Virginia, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. The terms of surrender were generous, reflecting Lincoln's desire to bind up the nation's wounds and begin the difficult process of healing. But just days after the surrender, the nation was plunged into mourning. President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, a final, tragic act in a war that had claimed over 620,000 lives. The Civil War was over, but its legacy endures. It ended slavery, preserved the Union, and set the United States on a new, albeit difficult, path toward becoming a more perfect nation. The questions and struggles that fueled the war continue to resonate in American society today. It is a powerful reminder of the cost of division and the enduring fight for freedom and equality. In July 1863, New York City explodes in violence. The draft riots are not merely protests. They become days of chaos, attacks on draft offices, clashes with police, arson, and brutal assaults on black New Yorkers. The violence exposes a reality Lincoln understands but cannot easily speak aloud. Many in the North will fight to preserve the Union while still despising the idea of black freedom and citizenship. Emancipation may be morally right and strategically necessary, but it is politically combustible. Lincoln faces opposition from Copperheads, Northern Democrats, who argue the war is tyrannical and unwinnable. Some denounce Lincoln as a dictator for suspending habeas corpus, for arresting suspected saboteurs, and for shutting down newspapers accused of aiding rebellion. Lincoln insists these measures are necessary to prevent the Union from being destroyed from within while it fights enemies without. One of the most controversial episodes involves Clement Vallandigham, an Ohio Democrat arrested for anti-war speech and tried by a military commission. He is ultimately exiled to the Confederacy. Critics call it an assault on free speech. Supporters argue that open encouragement of resistance during war is not mere opinion. It is a weapon. Lincoln's position is both pragmatic and unsettling. The Constitution is not a suicide pact. Government cannot protect civil liberties if the government itself collapses. Yet he is also aware, sometimes painfully, that extraordinary power can become habit, and that a republic must be careful about what it normalizes even in emergencies. While the nation strains, Lincoln tries to shape meaning. In November 1863, he travels to Gettysburg for the dedication of a national cemetery. The main speaker is Edward Everett, a celebrated orator, who delivers a long formal address as was customary. Lincoln's remarks are brief, so brief that some in the crowd do not immediately realize he is finished. But the Gettysburg Address becomes one of the defining statements of American purpose. Lincoln does not dwell on tactics or blame. He reframes the war as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can endure. He honors the dead by insisting their sacrifice must not be meaningless. And he makes a claim that reaches beyond the restoration of the old Union. This war, he says, must produce a new birth of freedom. In that phrase, Lincoln binds emancipation to national identity. The Union that emerges cannot simply be the pre-war arrangement patched back together. It must be something refounded, still imperfect, still conflicted, but altered in direction. Yet behind the elevated language, Lincoln's daily reality remains brutal. Victory still requires generals who can break Confederate armies. And in late 1863, the Union still lacks consistent success in the East. Lincoln's patience with hesitation is running out. He watches as battles produce carnage without resolution. He watches as commanders retreat after partial success. He watches opportunities evaporate while the Confederacy survives another season. And he begins to see that the war will not be won by one brilliant maneuver, but by relentless pressure on Confederate armies, on Confederate logistics, on Confederate morale, and on slavery's remaining infrastructure. This is where Ulysses S. Grant enters the center of Lincoln's vision. Grant is not polished. He is not beloved by the political class. He is accused by some of being a butcher and by others of being a drunk. But Lincoln studies results. Grant takes forts. Grant takes cities. Grant keeps moving. And perhaps most importantly, Grant fights. When critics complain about Grant's casualties, Lincoln's response is blunt. He cannot spare this man. He fights. In early 1864, Lincoln promotes Grant to lieutenant general and gives him command of all Union armies, the first time such a rank has been held since George Washington. The decision is more than administrative, it is strategic. Lincoln is choosing a war of coordinated pressure, multiple Union armies advancing at once so the Confederacy cannot shift troops to meet each threat. Grant's plan is harsh and direct. In the East, he will go after Lee, not Richmond first Lee, because as long as Lee's army exists, Richmond can survive. In the West, William Tecumseh Sherman will drive toward Atlanta, striking at Confederate industry and transportation. Other forces will operate in the Shenandoah Valley, a breadbasket and invasion corridor, to deny the Confederacy its resources. This is the beginning of what many will later call hard war. Not necessarily war against civilians as a primary target, but war that recognizes the Confederacy's ability to fight depends on its economy, infrastructure, and social system. The old idea of limited, gentlemanly conflict is collapsing under the scale of the rebellion and the stakes of slavery. In May 1864, Grant begins the Overland Campaign. The fighting is relentless. The Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor. These are not set-piece battles with clear endings. They are continuous collisions, days of smoke and chaos, trenches filling with dead, forests burning as wounded men lie trapped between lines. The casualty numbers are horrifying, and northern newspapers print them relentlessly. Critics accuse Lincoln and Grant of slaughter. Soldiers write home with despair. Mary Lincoln, already fragile under years of loss and stress, grows more erratic. Lincoln absorbs it all, the political attacks, the casualty reports, the grief, while trying to maintain a government and a war effort at the same time. And still, there is a crucial difference between Grant and earlier commanders. After each bloody fight, Grant does not retreat north. He moves south. He keeps contact with Lee. He forces the Confederates to keep spending men they cannot replace. By mid-1864, Grant has Lee pinned near Petersburg, beginning a siege that will last months. Richmond is not taken, but it is threatened and starved. The war is becoming a vice. Yet military pressure alone does not guarantee political survival. An election is coming. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln must stand before voters while the war is still raging and casualty lists keep lengthening. His opponents argue that the war cannot be won, that peace must be negotiated, that Lincoln's policies, especially emancipation, have turned a limited conflict into a revolutionary disaster. Even within Lincoln's own party coalition, tension rises. Some radicals think he is still too cautious. Some moderates fear he has gone too far. There are moments when Lincoln himself privately doubts he will be re-elected. He writes a memo sealed and shown later to his cabinet, suggesting that his administration may lose and that he will still have a duty to cooperate with the incoming president to save the Union before Inauguration Day. This is the atmosphere of 1864, the nation fighting for its life abroad and at the ballot box at home. And Lincoln, who has always believed that legitimacy matters, knows that winning the war without sustaining democratic government would hollow out the victory. He needs to defeat the Confederacy, and he needs to do it as an elected leader answerable to the public, not as a permanent ruler. The next months will decide both outcomes. By the late summer of 1864, the war has reached a cruel plateau. The Confederacy is battered, but not broken. Grant is locked in siege lines at Petersburg. Sherman is grinding toward Atlanta. Casualties keep coming, and in the North, a dangerous question spreads through homes, newspapers, and political meetings. What if this never ends? Lincoln feels the danger in the political air. There are days when even his allies speak as if defeat at the ballot box is likely. Peace advocates gain volume, arguing that negotiation is the only humane path left. Many voters do not doubt Lincoln's honesty. They doubt the possibility of victory at a cost they can still bear. The Democratic Party nominates George B. McClellan, Lincoln's former general, running as a man who can restore the Union with competence and restraint. But the party platform, shaped by its peace wing, calls the war a failure and suggests an armistice and negotiations. McClellan tries to straddle the contradiction. He promises both union and peace. It is a message designed to catch the exhausted, the angry, the grieving, and the uncertain all at once. Lincoln's unlickened, the Republicans and the War Democrats who have joined them under the National Union. Label tries to hold together the broadest possible front. Abolitionists who demand the full destruction of slavery, moderates who primarily want the Union restored, and border state unionists who fear radical change but fear disunion more. Lincoln understands that the election is not simply about him. It is about whether a democracy can continue a war of national survival without surrendering to fatigue. If he loses, the Confederacy may interpret it as a signal that time is on its side, that the North's will is breaking, and that independence is only a few political turns away. Then, in September 1864, the war gives Lincoln what he has needed for months: evidence that victory is real. Sherman takes Atlanta. The city is not just a dot on a map. It is a rail hub, an industrial center, a symbol of Confederate logistics and morale. Its fall sends a shock through the South and a wave of relief through the North. For months, critics have said the war is endless and directionless. Atlanta proves movement. It proves progress. It changes the emotional weather of the nation. The year is 1865. The American Civil War, a brutal, 4-year conflict that has torn the nation apart, is entering its final, dramatic chapter. The Confederacy, once defiant, is now on the brink of collapse. Its armies are battered, its economy is in ruins, and its people are exhausted. But the end, when it comes, will be a saga of desperate last stands, fateful decisions, and the monumental task of reuniting a shattered country. Welcome to the story of the final months of the Civil War. By January 1865, the strategic situation was overwhelmingly in the Union's favor. General Ulysses S. Grant's massive Army of the Potomac had pinned down General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in a grueling siege at Petersburg, just south of the Confederate capital of Richmond. For 9 long months, the two armies had faced each other in a labyrinth of trenches, a grim preview of the warfare that would define World War I a half-century later. Lee's men were starving, freezing, and deserting in droves. Supplies were non-existent. The once proud army was a shadow of its former self. Meanwhile, in the Western theater, General William Tecumseh Sherman had carved a path of destruction through Georgia on his march to the sea, capturing Savannah just before Christmas. Now, he was turning his attention northward, preparing to march through the Carolinas. His goal was to crush the heart of the Confederacy and link up with Grant in Virginia, effectively surrounding Lee's army. Sherman's campaign was as much a psychological blow as a military one, demonstrating to the Southern populace that their government could no longer protect them. Politically, the writing was on the wall. Abraham Lincoln had won a resounding re-election in November 1864, a clear mandate from the Northern public to see the war through to victory and abolish slavery. In his second inaugural address on March 4, 1865, Lincoln set a tone not of triumph, but of reconciliation. Standing before the still unfinished Capitol dome, he delivered one of the most powerful speeches in American history, urging his countrymen to act with malice toward none, with charity for all, to bind up the nation's wounds. His vision was for a just and lasting peace, one that would heal the deep divisions the war had created. Even as Lincoln spoke of peace, the final military endgame was set in motion. In late March, Grant finally decided to break the stalemate at Petersburg. On April 1st, Union forces achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Five Forks, a key crossroads southwest of Petersburg. This victory shattered Lee's right flank and cut off his last remaining supply line, the South Side Railroad. The fall of Five Forks made the Confederate position at both Petersburg and Richmond untenable. The news reached Lee on the morning of April 2nd. He sent a stark message to Confederate President Jefferson Davis. "I think it is absolutely necessary that we should abandon our position tonight." That night, under the cover of darkness, Lee's army slipped out of the trenches they had defended for nearly a year. The Confederate government fled Richmond, setting fire to warehouses and government buildings as they left. The next day, April 3rd, Union troops, including regiments of United States colored troops, marched into the smoldering Confederate capital. The symbolism was immense. The city that had been the heart of the rebellion was now under Union control. For Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, the retreat was a desperate race for survival. Lee's plan was to march west, hoping to resupply his starving army at depots along the railroad, and then turn south to link up with General Joseph E. Johnston's forces in North Carolina. But it was a race he could not win. Grant's pursuit was relentless. Union cavalry, led by the aggressive General Philip Sheridan, hounded the Confederate column, striking at their flanks and racing ahead to block their path. The retreat became a week-long nightmare for the Confederate soldiers. They were exhausted, hungry, and demoralized. Union forces captured thousands of prisoners and vital supply wagons. At Sailor's Creek on April 6th, nearly a quarter of Lee's remaining army was cut off and captured. It was a devastating blow from which there was no recovery. One Confederate general, looking at the disaster, exclaimed to Lee, "My God, General, has the army dissolved?" Lee, ever the stoic, knew the end was near. Finally, on the morning of April 9th, Lee's path was blocked. His vanguard, attempting to break through to the supply trains rumored to be at Appomattox Station, was met not by a thin screen of cavalry, but by 2 corps of Union infantry. Surrounded on 3 sides and with no hope of escape, Lee knew the fight was over. He turned to one of his aides and said, "There is nothing left for me to do but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." That afternoon, Palm Sunday, April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee, dressed in his finest uniform, rode to the village of Appomattox Courthouse to meet Ulysses S. Grant. The two men met in the parlor of a private home, owned by Wilmer McLean, a man who, in a strange twist of fate, had moved from Manassas to escape the war after the first major battle was fought on his farm. The war, it seemed, had followed him. The contrast between the two commanders was striking. Lee was tall, aristocratic, and impeccably dressed. Grant, splattered with mud from the field, arrived in a private's uniform with only his general's straps to indicate his rank. Despite the years of bitter conflict, the meeting was professional and respectful. Grant, remembering Lincoln's desire for a compassionate peace, offered generous terms. The Confederate officers and men would be paroled and allowed to return home. They would not be imprisoned or prosecuted for treason. Grant even allowed the men to keep their horses and mules so they could put in a crop to carry themselves and their families through the next winter. When Lee returned to his men, they crowded around him, tears streaming down their faces. In a brief, emotional farewell address, he told them, after 4 years of arduous service, marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse effectively ended the Civil War. Although other Confederate forces remained in the field, they quickly followed suit. General Johnston surrendered to Sherman in North Carolina on April 26th, and the final skirmish of the war was fought in Texas in mid-May. The joy in the North was immense, but it was tragically short-lived. Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, on the evening of April 14th, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The man whose leadership had preserved the Union and whose vision was set on a merciful Reconstruction would not live to see it through. His death cast a dark shadow over the war's end and ushered in a period of uncertainty and political turmoil that would make the process of healing the nation even more difficult. The final months of the Civil War were a whirlwind of decisive battles, strategic collapse, and profound political moments. From the trenches of Petersburg to the parlor at Appomattox, the events of early 1865 brought an end to America's bloodiest conflict. The war had cost over 620,000 lives and left a legacy of devastation, particularly in the South. But it had also resulted in the preservation of the United States and the abolition of slavery, fundamentally reshaping the nation's destiny. The long, difficult road of Reconstruction lay ahead, but the Union, forged anew in the fires of war, had endured. Radical Republicans in Congress distrust such leniency. They want stronger guarantees for black rights and stronger punishment for Confederate leaders. They fear that if old elites return to power, slavery will be replaced by something similar in practice, and the South will re-enter the Union still hostile, still oppressive, still determined to preserve white supremacy under a new legal mask. Lincoln stands between these forces, sympathetic to stronger protections, but wary of policies that could prolong bitterness and resistance. He is evolving even here. Late in the war, he begins to speak publicly, though cautiously, about black suffrage, especially for educated black men and black veterans. It is a significant shift, and it signals that Lincoln's idea of the post-war nation may have been moving toward broader citizenship than many expected. But the future will not wait for his gradualism. On April 14, 1865, Good Friday, Washington is still in celebration. Lincoln spends the day in meetings talking about Reconstruction in practical terms. He appears tired but lighter than he has in years. In the evening, he decides to attend a play at Ford's Theater with his wife Mary and 2 guests. The play is Our American Cousin, a comedy. The audience laughs. The president sits in a decorated box, visible to the crowd. The city's security is relaxed. The war is over, many believe, and the danger is past. But one man has decided otherwise. John Wilkes Booth is an actor, famous, charismatic, and fanatically committed to the Confederate cause. He has been part of a conspiracy that originally intended to kidnap Lincoln as leverage for prisoner exchange. As Confederate defeat becomes certain, the plot radicalizes. Booth chooses assassination, hoping to strike the Union government and revive Confederate resistance through chaos. That night, Booth enters the presidential box and shoots Lincoln in the back of the head at close range. He stabs Major Henry Rathbone, who tries to stop him, and leaps to the stage, breaking his leg but escaping. He shouts words that become instantly debated and mythologized, then disappears into the night. In the theater, confusion turns to horror. Doctors in the audience rush forward. Lincoln is carried across the street to a boarding house, laid on a bed too short for his long frame. He never regains consciousness. Through the night, Washington holds its breath. Cabinet members arrive. Soldiers guard the door. Mary Lincoln cries out in grief. The same nation that was celebrating victory now faces a different kind of darkness. The sudden removal of the one figure many believe is holding the post-war future together. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln dies. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, standing in the room, speaks words that capture the moment's felt scale. Now he belongs to the ages. Whether perfectly recorded or slightly altered by memory, the sentiment is real. Lincoln's death immediately begins to turn him into something beyond a politician, beyond a president, into a symbol. The assassination is not isolated. That same night, conspirators attack other targets. Secretary of State Seward is severely wounded in his home but survives. Vice President Andrew Johnson is not successfully attacked. The broader plot fails in full scope, but the psychological impact is enormous. Even at the moment of victory, the nation is vulnerable. A massive manhunt follows. Booth is tracked and cornered in a Virginia barn. He refuses to surrender. The barn is set on fire. Booth is shot and dies soon after. Other conspirators are tried by a military commission and executed. The country, raw with grief and anger, wants justice and wants it quickly. Lincoln's funeral becomes a national ritual. His body is carried by train through major northern cities, retracing the path of his inaugural journey in reverse. Crowds line tracks for miles. Black and white mourners stand together in many places, though the nation's racial divide remains deep. Churches toll bells. Homes display black crepe. People weep openly, not only for Lincoln, but for what they believe he represented: endurance, moral direction, and the possibility of reunion without endless revenge. But Lincoln's death changes Reconstruction immediately. Andrew Johnson becomes president. Johnson is a Southern Unionist from Tennessee, deeply hostile to the planter aristocracy in one sense, but also deeply committed to white supremacy. He supports rapid restoration of Southern governments with limited safeguards for freed people. Southern legislatures, under Johnson's leniency, begin passing black codes laws designed to control black labor and restrict freedom in practice. Violence against freed people rises. The conflict over the meaning of freedom becomes a conflict over power itself. Radical Republicans in Congress respond by pushing for stronger federal intervention civil rights legislation. The Freedmen's Bureau, constitutional amendments establishing citizenship and equal protection. Reconstruction becomes a fierce struggle between branches of government and between competing visions of America. One that treats emancipation as the end of the story, and one that insists emancipation is only the beginning. Lincoln is not there to steer, to compromise, or to restrain extremes. No one can know exactly what he would have done, and that uncertainty becomes part of the nation's long argument over him. Some later generations will claim he would have been gentle, preventing conflict. Others will claim he would have supported stronger protections for freed people. The record suggests a man evolving under pressure, capable of surprising change, but also cautious, political, and deeply aware of public limits. His legacy becomes contested terrain. In the South, as Reconstruction ends and white supremacy reasserts itself through violence and law, a lost cause mythology grows, romanticizing the Confederacy as noble, minimizing slavery as a cause, and portraying the war as a tragedy of misunderstood honor. In that mythology, Lincoln is sometimes demonized as a tyrant, sometimes reluctantly respected as magnanimous, but always treated as an opponent in a story designed to cleanse the Confederacy's purpose. In the North, Lincoln becomes a civic saint, his complexity smoothed into marble. His doubts, his missteps, and the political compromises that shaped his path are often softened. The nation prefers heroes who feel clean. But Lincoln's real significance is not that he was flawless. It is that he operated inside the ugliest crisis the country ever faced and managed to keep a democratic government functioning while changing the nation's moral and legal foundation. He began as a frontier boy with almost no formal schooling, carrying firewood and reading borrowed books by dim light. He became a lawyer who learned how to speak to ordinary people without pretending to be one of them. He became a politician who hated slavery but understood that declaring hatred is not the same as dismantling an institution woven into law, economy, and violence. As president, he made choices that remain debated, suspending civil liberties in certain contexts, allowing military tribunals, expanding executive power, tolerating generals who failed too long, and moving slowly at first on emancipation. And yet he also made decisions that reshaped the country, holding the Union together when many expected it to collapse, committing the war to freedom, and driving the abolition of slavery into the Constitution itself. Lincoln's words endure because they are not merely beautiful. They are built from an understanding of human limitation. He did not promise perfect justice in his lifetime. He promised a direction toward a nation that could claim liberty with less hypocrisy than before. He did not end racism. He did not create equality. But he helped destroy the legal structure that made slavery the nation's central engine, and he forced the United States to confront what it had been and what it might become. In the end, Lincoln is remembered in monuments and currency, in classrooms and ceremonies. But his truest monument is the unresolved work he left behind, the question of whether a nation founded on equality can be made to practice it, not in speeches, but in law and daily life, in who is protected and who is not. The war proved the Union could survive by force and sacrifice. Lincoln's deeper challenge, still alive long after the cannons went silent, is whether the Union can survive by meaning, because a house can be held together with nails and beams. But a nation, if it endures, must be held together by something harder, the willingness to keep expanding the circle of freedom until the words, "All men are created equal," are not an aspiration spoken at funerals, but a reality defended in life.